Hello, I'm Gary Fader, and the subject of our program today is making bandsaw boxes. So to start, we're going to move into another room and we're going to look at some bandsaw boxes and talk about how they're put together. Here we are. We have a bunch of bandsaw boxes, all a little bit different. But let me start by holding up a couple of books. This is really how I got started. It's a book called Building Beautiful Bandsaw Boxes by Ventura. And the nice part about this book is that it walks you through how to make a bandsaw box and what tools to use. But what's really nice is it has all of these really slick templates that you can copy, and it gives you the percentage to blow them up if you want to make them the size that they make, and some great pictures of different bandsaw boxes, some of which you'll see here. I didn't find this one quite as useful, but it's called the Ultimate Bandsaw Box by Menke, M-E-N-K-E. So it too has some really neat designs in here and different templates. So let's look at bandsaw boxes. This is the way they start. Every one starts with a glued up block, and in a minute I'll show you how we glue them up. But each one has one thing in common, and that is it has a bandsaw blade entry point. And some of them are easy and some of them are hard. For example, if it's a box that has open sides, that's easy. The blade can just come right in and around it. If it's a box that is closed, where the drawers are all surrounded by wood, here's the entry point here. So you have to make a cut, but then you can squeeze the box together and put some glue in there and seal it up so that you really hardly see it. Some boxes are a little trickier than others. For example, if you look at this Bombay box, you wouldn't necessarily think it was a bandsaw box. But in fact, if you disregard the top and the bottom, the whole central portion is really just the same as the rest of these. The entry point was actually here, and the blade came all the way up here, and that whole side was taken off before cutting out the drawers. And then everything's glued back together again. So if you look at the drawers after you cut them out, we'll do that in a minute. Once the drawer is cut out, it's a solid block. So we cut off the front part, cut off the back part, turn this up on the bandsaw, and cut out the center section, and then glue it back together. And we'll have cut the back off to start with, and we'll be gluing that back on. So that's kind of the anatomy. If you look at this infinity box, there's another one that's a little tricky. You don't see the entry point, but in fact, this was cut right here to get the blade into here, and then, like I said before, glued back together, and entry point sort of disappears. The group of bandsaw boxes that the patterns exist in these books, or some of them I got out of magazines. It's kind of no limit to the kind of shapes you can make. So with that, let's go back over to the shop and we'll get started on making one. Any bandsaw box obviously starts with wood, and what you can see here on this slide is a board. It's ambrosia maple, which makes nice bandsaw boxes because of the grain and pattern in them. And if you can look closely, you can see I've sliced it up into roughly 1 foot sections. So once the board's cut up on any kind of a crosscut saw, I have a radial arm saw that I use. The next step is to start to put it together into a block. And on this slide you can see I'm folding it up like an accordion so that the ends actually create a bit of like a book matched pattern on the sides of the box. So once it's arranged that way, and you can see on this slide, when it's arranged in a block, I've marked the cut ends so that you can see the 1s are going together, the 3s are going together, and the 5s are going together. And you can see the bit of book matching of the patterns. The next step is to glue it up, and it's important to get an adequate amount of glue so you don't get any gaps when we clamp it together. So glue on both sides. Spread the glue out so that it's nice and even. You can see I use one of those glue spreaders. And then basically clamp away and make it really tight. You're going to get a lot of squeeze out, and that's okay. You can see the wax paper under it to catch all the glue. Just let it cure overnight. Then be ready to start working on it. So the first step is to decide what shape you want to make your bandsaw box. Here's a pattern that I've used many times. You can see it's marked up with a lot of information that I'll go back to about what sort of what size roundover bits and different aspects of it. So the easiest thing to do to get started is to take our block, and after it's all glued up, and you can pick the side that you like the most. That I'll pick that as the back, and this is the front, and I'll probably orient it this way and try to pick up some of this interesting pattern toward the bottom. Two critical elements. One is the blade should be sharp. This is a new blade, so hopefully that'll work just fine. And the other is to make sure that your blade is perfectly perpendicular to your table. And the easiest way to check that is with a piece of wood, something like this. Hold it flat, cut into it so it makes a line like that, and then turn it around and feed it into the back, and it should line up perfectly when you do that. And if it's off a little bit, adjust your table. If it's not perfectly perpendicular, the drawers are not going to fit into the hole that you cut, and you'll be really unhappy. Okay, so I've set the fence so that I'm going to take maybe 3/16 or 1/4 inch off the bottom to give me a perfectly flat bottom. Okay, so now we've got a nice flat bottom, and we're ready to cut off the back before we start cutting the drawers. So once again, this is what we picked for a back, and make the back just about a 1/4 inch thick. So I've marked 1/4 inch, and now I'm going to set the fence. Okay, so again, the critical part of this is to push it through as straight as you can, keeping it tight against the fence so that the cut is perfectly flat. So here we go again. Couple of places so I can position it back where it came from. Okay, now we're ready to attach the pattern to the front. I've cut the basic part of that pattern out of here, and the next step is going to be to spray glue the back of this, stick it on, try to get it so that the bottom is right even with the bottom, and then we'll begin cutting it out. Spray glue the back of that piece of paper. Any kind of spray glue will work, and I can tell you up front, very efficient way to get the pattern off is just to take some mineral spirits and a brush and just dab it on the paper. Give it 30 seconds and peels right off. Any tight bond glue works just fine. I normally just use the original tight bond. Okay, so our pattern is glued on. What I'm going to start is I'm going to cut off this piece here so that I can get right at the entry point. And then we'll start cutting the drawer this way, back the blade out, which can be a little bit difficult sometimes. You just have to go really slow because it's going to be tending to pull off the guide. And then we'll come back in and cut the rest of this drawer out. And then we'll come up here, do the same thing with the upper drawer. The real important part of this to get a nice quality bandsaw box is the smoothness with which you make the cut. So it takes some practice, and if you're going to do any of these, I would strongly encourage you to do some practicing before you get serious about cutting the real thing. If you tend to wobble around as you cut, then in order to make the bandsaw box look good, you're going to end up sanding this surface as smooth, and then the drawers are going to be loose as you take away material. So once again, the trick is nice, smooth, even, uniform cutting. Now we're going to come into this entry point, go around the top of the drawer. Okay, so now we've got the top cut. I'm going to very gently get this out of here, hopefully.
How many guild members do you need to remove a blade from a bandsaw box cut?
You know what? Let me get some dental floss. Let's try it. Okay, so at this point we've got the drawers cut out. The next step is going to be to start to cut the drawers themselves. Okay, the next step is going to be to cut the front and the back off the drawers. And it works out well if the back is about 1/4 inch and the front is about 1/2 inch. So with those marked, now we'll line up the fence. Okay, so we've got the fronts and the backs cut off, and now we're going to mark the places where we're going to cut the center parts out of the drawers. So obviously important to make sure you're got the fronts facing up, and we can mark using the same patterns. We can mark the vertical parts. Now you want to make sure that you leave enough material here when you cut the bottoms. So the next step is to mark where we're going to take the bandsaw and curve the bottoms of the drawers. Just to make them pretty neat. Generally find a 1-inch diameter circle. Makes a pretty good arc on that. Okay, and of course we'll do both drawers. Now we'll go back over to the bandsaw and cut out the drawer internals. To get nice flat bottoms, you want to be careful and go slowly and consistently across the bottom. So now we've got our drawer pretty much made. Got the internals, so we've got the front, and where we've got the back. There we go. So there's one drawer. Now, before we reassemble the drawer, I want to show you how to make the felt lining very easily while you've got the drawer apart. Okay, the easiest way to do this while the box is still apart is to place the box, the bottom with the bottom of the felt, and one edge against the edge and mark it. Since I'm using black felt, I'm using a white pencil, but if you're using a light color like green or red or something, you can use a regular pencil. I'm just going to make a mark so that it conforms to the box, and then just cut out that piece. Okay, so now we've got a piece that will fit in there perfectly. And at this point, you're just going to do this for all 4 sections in the two drawers, rather, and just set it aside. The important part is to make sure you mark it. So develop some kind of a marking pattern so you know exactly where that goes back into and which way it goes back. So the next step is to sand boxes and the inside of the frame. So this is where having an oscillating sander comes in really handy. I'm just going to give you a short demo of this. I'm not going to take the time to sand everything. Keep in mind you're going to be covering all this with felt, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want it to be pretty even. Okay, so the next step then is going to be to reassemble the drawers, and I'll show you another couple of tricks so that you get really good alignment. So the deal is drill a couple of really tiny holes. Take some wire brads. These happen to be number 19, half-inch long. Cut them off as close as you can to the wood. And take your sides very, very carefully. Get it all lined up so that it's perfectly smooth edges. And press. And you can relieve these holes just a little bit. So now, when you glue them up and clamp them, you're going to get real good alignment, and it's not going to slide around or drift as the glue dries. As you apply the glue, what I found is spread the glue heavily on the edges, avoid getting a lot of glue on the inside, and then when you clamp the pieces on, you'll get some squeeze out on the outside. Give it 15 minutes and come back and just take a paint scraper or a screwdriver and scrape off the excess that's squeezed out. Hopefully you won't get any on the inside. So once you get it all glued up and pinned, I'm just going to clamp everything together and give it 45 minutes or so to dry. Clamp it all up. That's the idea. So then you've got the boxes reassembled, and once the glue is dry, then it would be time to go back to the spindle sander and sand the bottoms and the top edges. and then you're pretty much done with the drawers. The last part of the drawers are about the drawer handles. If you recall, the pattern for these was on the front. I cut out the patterns, and let me cut one out on the bandsaw. So now we've got the handle roughed out. So the next step is going to be to go back to the spindle sander and sand up to the line. And so this is all nice and smooth. Okay, so now we've got the general shape of the handle, and the next step is going to be to taper the handle, and this is more art than anything else, just to give it a nice tapered shape. Okay, so now we've got the general shape of the handle, and then it's just a matter of coming back over here and tapering, rounding the edges. And again, it's more art form than anything else. Once you've got it to the general shape that you want, it's time to do a little hand sanding, sandpaper, and you see the way it'll fit on to the box. So once you're done with that, you'll end up with a couple of nice smooth handles that I made earlier. The next step will be to sand the inside of the frame. And again, back to the spindle sander. I'm not going to take the time to do that. You'll have to do some hand sanding in the corners, but the idea is to get it reasonably smooth without removing too much material, because again, the more material that you remove, the looser the drawers are going to get. I want to try to close this up. So the way to do that is to put some glue into the slot and then take a clamp, the right size, this is not, and squeeze it together and let that dry. And then once that's dry, you can come back and glue the back on. You're not gonna want to really sand the back itself, but this will all be smooth in here. And then using the same trick with the brads, you're going to want to drill a couple of holes for alignment. Spread glue everywhere on the surface. Try to avoid getting it close to the inside, because you don't want it to squeeze out inside the box. And then put this back on. Make sure your nails are engaged in the right place. I typically use a couple of pieces of wood as cauls, so I have a landing place for the clamps, and then it's a matter of, again, clamping the whole thing together so you get a good fit of clamps all around it, and again, letting it dry overnight. Once that's done, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. So you've got your drawers all sanded, put together. Got the back glued on, And then it's time to go back over to the bandsaw. We're ready to cut the outside of the box off. Point, you're ready to go back to the spindle sander and sand the whole exterior of the box. The next step is, after you've got this all sanded, is to get the bottom flat and smooth sanded. What I find works really well is take a piece of melamine and spray glue the back of a nice wide piece of sandpaper, and then it's just a matter of some elbow grease. And after a while, a little bit more elbow grease, you'll have a nice smooth flat surface on the bottom. The next step is to go over to the router table and start to round off the drawers and the box. What I found works pretty well, it makes a nice finish on it, is to do a quarter round on the front, eighth round on the back, and the same with the box itself. Do an eighth around the back and quarter around the front. For this particular box, it looks like I found the 3/16 round over worked well on the inside of the drawer openings. One of the last major steps is gluing on the handles. An easy way to do that is, again, I've got these marked top, and this is the bottom, so we'll use the bottom. Once again, to use this little trick to keep them aligned. And then you can, with this piece of template just sitting on here, you can line it right up, press it in, and you've got your marks for the One other trick that I've learned is very useful and saves a lot of frustration is to take some blue tape and put it on the edges so that after you get the glue on the back of this, you can get it lined up easily without groping around and trying to find the holes again and spreading glue all over the place. And again, when you put the glue on this, you really don't want any squeeze out. So just take a paintbrush, a small paintbrush, dip it in the glue, and give yourself a nice stripe down the center of it, and then glue it on. And I use tape as a clamp, so just tape over it to clamp it. Okay, so now final step is to glue in felt. So we've got bottom drawer, right rear, bottom drawer, right rear. So put your piece of felt in and you can see how nicely it fits. And then the next step, now you can trace the actual top of the box, top of the drawer. So take your scissors, cut that off. Do it for all the different pieces, and take some white glue. I use white glue because it dries clear, and with a paintbrush put white glue on the entire surface on each drawer piece. You're pretty much fine if that sticks all by itself. You don't have to clamp it or anything. Put all those pieces in, and then you can measure the distance between the pieces of felt. This is something like 3 1/8. And take your felt and cut 3 1/8 strips, and then you can take those strips, tuck them into the sides, and once you get it perfectly aligned with everything, draw a line across and slice it off, and you've got the bottom pieces. So normally I will shellac the inside because then the glue will stick to it better. Then the outside's all finished before the felt is glued in, so you don't get any finish on the felt. Here's one that's all finished that we looked at a little earlier. But you can see the way, once you round over the edges, the gaps sort of disappear. There's a nicely lined drawer done the same way. And one other trick, you can buy this plastic sliding tape. And the beauty of it is it just fills in the gap underneath, it raises the drawer just a little bit, so you get an even space all the way around. This particular box is finished with Minwax antique oil finish, probably 3 or 4 coats. It just turns out to be a really nice gift. And then you've got a bandsaw box. And if you're happy with it, you can put your initials or something on the bottom and some felt feet. I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, always feel free to call me. I screwed up. Hang on, guys. Let me reset here, see if I can get this off. If I follow my notes, I'd be better off.